You are listening to the ERP Organizational Change Journal, a podcast brought to you by Nestell and Associates.
Suppose you're leading a kickoff meeting for an organization that is just starting an ERP implementation. How would you define and describe for them success in terms of ERP organizational change? So you provided a great explanation and an answer to what is ERP, but what does it look like to successfully implement ERP?
It's not straightforward, Jack, and I really had to spend some time digging on this, researching this, and actually wrote a blog article on this. I look at it in terms of two areas, user adoption and user engagement. And both of these can be managed. When I'm talking about user adoption, I'm talking about how are your users involved in your ERP implementation? What training have they taken? What test cases have they executed? Also, how many users are actually using the solution that you're providing? These attributes can be quantified and can be tracked and can be measured. On the user engagement side, it's more about how are they using the solution? Are they using the solution correctly? So I'll look at things like how many manual transactions are they doing? And if they're doing an inordinate amount, I want to know why. Is it because we didn't provide the functionality, or the functionality is there, but the people are not using it for one reason or another? Also, how many corrective transactions are they doing? It really speaks to, okay, why wasn't it done right in the first place? Is this a training gap? Is it that the functionality is not working as designed? Also, exception transactions, identifying the root cause, if you will, for these transactions, whether that is, again, related to training, or it could actually be a software issue, that requires additional work to ensure that the software is working correctly. So those are the two areas that I look at in defining success. So can I give you percentages? No, not really. I shoot for 100% on both. Do I get
Right.
that? No. Yeah. Will I ever get that? Probably not. But you're looking at least between that 80 to 100% range of getting that. And that just doesn't happen overnight, right? There's a window called sustainability. Once you go live, everything's new. And there's a time where the organization is learning how to best utilize the ERP system, and vice versa. There's always that shakeout time. And the more that you can reduce that window, the better results you're going to get, especially in these two key areas. And that goes back to effective organizational change, as well as training and enablement. Those are not nice to haves. Those are mandatory for your success.
Sure. So, Brett, you mentioned a couple of percentages there in terms of the success with those two components that you described for us. But how would you describe your general understanding of ERP implementation success rates in the field, based on your work, anecdotal evidence of others in your research? I think anyone that's been in the practice as long as you have and I have and a lot of our colleagues, it's a pretty tough business. But what would you say if you just have to give some sort of rate in terms of success? So you provided what ERP is to our listeners. You gave your definition of success. What would you say are the success rates in practice in general?
And forgive me, I'm probably going to give you a generic answer on this, but generally they're half of where they need to be. So what's important as far as, improving success rates is knowing and understanding that you can go live with an ERP system and still not be successful. So number one, it's kind of understanding that dynamic. And then really, okay, you're live. Okay, from a SI partner perspective or a consultant, you say they're live, they're successful. Not necessarily. You really need to stretch and think a little bit further in terms of how customers define success, number one, because it's usually not done during the sales cycle. It's really done during the implementation, where you really get deep down into the weeds in terms of what defines success. Also, there's a couple of areas that you need to focus on, especially as a project manager. First and foremost, customer expectations. If customer expectations are way up here and you know what they're implementing is not even close to their expectations, first thing I do as a project manager is, okay, I need to reset some expectations. You're setting the bar so high, I can't even touch it. And there's no hope of me of touching that. So let's work to get to some realistic expectations. I think that that's not done as much as it should be during ERP implementations. It's a tough job, granted, because they just got sold, something that sounds wonderful. And then all of a sudden you come in and say, well, let me tell you the real story, what you're getting.
That's a good point, right? Because I think a lot of what we need to do as practitioners, and this isn't easy, is be very honest about the realities and expectations about as far as what the organization is about to endure. And it is challenging. There's so many dynamics and so many variables, and it is very challenging. So I think that part you mentioned about just being realistic, being honest about it is a huge part of being proactive, about the whole expectation piece.
Right, Jack. And that during the sales cycle, whenever you define what the scope is going to be and what the price is going to be, you're still operating at a high level. Mm-hmm. You're not in the weeds yet. So you're making a lot of assumptions. You're assuming a lot of constraints that are going to be proven during the implementation. And it leads to the second point that I see happen more times than not is compromising quality for margin. So it's knowing that, okay, there's a delta here. How do I address that delta? I think sometimes in the project management community, we put too much emphasis on time, in scope, in budget, and not enough on customer satisfaction. So something's got to give, right, Jack? And usually you start cutting corners. And when you start doing that, it has an impact.